So I want to welcome everyone to this panel, which is titled Sustainability Stories from the Field. And the reason I'm talking to you is because of a really amazing initiative that I want to tell you about, which you may not know about, which is the Moon Sjogren Sustainability and Climate Change Initiative. And this is, And the Moon Sjogren family looked around and saw that, Amherst seemed like it could be doing a lot more on this front. And they saw a vacuum, and they decided to step in and fill it with the 3 generations of Amherst alums that are part of the family. And the initiative has already done a lot of really amazing things, and one of those things is establishing a sustainability center, which is actually located right in Charles Pratt over there. And it's really amazing. And there's first of all, the director is Wes Strips up there in the back. He's going to wave. And so Wes has created out of really nothing, but except for a whole lot of opportunity, a bunch of students who are really excited about what our planet could look like in the future, about sustainability efforts, and about thinking about careers in this area, which is something that has been lacking at the career office. And they do amazing things, and I could spend this whole time talking about them, but I'm going to just refer you to Wes if you want to find out more. He'll be sitting at a table outside afterwards, and please just ask him what he's doing, because one of the things they did was invite me here in February for a whirlwind 3 days of teaching classes, meeting with students, giving an evening lecture, and I found so much enthusiasm from the students here around our planet and its future. And a lot of that energy and enthusiasm has come from this fund, which is so young, but it's really making a difference already. And I guess I did not introduce myself. So my name's Juli Berwald. I'm class of '89. And I'm a science writer I'm an ocean scientist. And I will tell you more about me in a second. But first of all, I just want to point out this extensive panel we have, which is amazing. And what we're going to do is each of these people who have contributed in different ways to sustainability and climate change are going to have a short 5 minutes to tell their story of sustainability. But this is an incredible panel. And yesterday, I went to this wonderful talk about higher ed, and one of the things they did was ask us all to define liberal arts. And that was really thought-provoking to me, and it was like I started to think about this panel, this sustainability panel, and I thought, well, how would you define not sustainability, but panel? And so there are many different definitions of panel. There is the comic book panel. There's like the panel for like a circuit board. But the kind of panel that I was thinking about is the pieces of wood that make up a fence are each a panel. And the thing that makes them a panel is that they're connected to the next thing over. And that's what gives them their support. And so even though these stories are really different and divergent from each other, as we had a Zoom call, and there are these connections and these themes that I think you'll see running through our stories that I think make this panel cohesive. So that's my introduction on that front. We are arranged in order, not alphabetical or by height, although we might be arranged by height. But actually by our stories. And down at the far end, we have the local Amy Klippenstein and Paul Lacinski, who are our local representatives. Then we have Deb Pasternak. Also, oh, these are 89ers. Another 89er. Deb's work has kind of ranged from the local to the regional. And then we have Emery Sorvino. And she is a class of 19. And her work has ranged more from regional to national. And then we have Abbey Gardner, 89, her work is really global. And then my work, which is the ocean, so it's sort of like in its own category. But we're going to start down at the end. Everyone's going to talk for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, because we just know you guys are going to have amazing comments and questions for this panel. So take it away.
All right, I'm actually going to start, even though I'm not on the end here and not the tallest. Paul and I, well, I guess I want to start by saying the first class that I took at Amherst here was the Introduction to Liberal Studies class on food. And at the time, it never occurred to me that that would be something that would be a thread that followed through my whole career. And I think that class was incredibly influential in showing me that food is not just about what's on your plate. It's really, there are so many social and political and community implications to food that it's the perfect liberal arts topic. And you can use your skills in so many ways with it. So after Paul and I graduated, we drove around the country for a while, but we ended up back in this area, and we're looking for a way to really be involved with our community. And I started growing vegetables. I had worked on a vegetable farm, and I wanted Paul to start farming with me. We also owned a construction company at the time, and my lure, the bait to lure him back to farm with me, was that we could get cows. Mistake number one. Don't do that. But what it meant is that we started milking cows with the idea that we were going to be able to farm on a small scale and distribute our product locally. We also started making yogurt in order to be able to sell the milk to ourselves instead of having to sell it into a large co-op, which meant that we could basically set our own pricing for milk. But this was important to us because local food, there are a lot of benefits to local food. You know, the supply chains are much shorter. You're not spending money on fossil fuels for trucking across the country. There are lots of benefits to local food, and also just supporting our community. So we ended up farming for 20 years, pretty much. There are a lot of people who remember, I think at the 20th reunion, we did a presentation where we showed all the pictures and named all the cows, and there are people who remember specific cows. So 4 years ago, we actually split the business in half, divided it into the farm and the yogurt processing business, and we sold off the farm. And part of that was because working 100 hours a week and destroying our bodies was not really sustainable in the long term. So we sold the farm to a younger couple. We still buy milk from them. We still make yogurt at the facility, at that farm that we built in order to make yogurt. And at this point, we were also looking to sell the yogurt business. So if anybody wants to buy a yogurt business, talk to us afterwards. But what we have seen through 20 years of farming is a lot of changes, both in the climate and in the way that people have responded to both local food and to the way that farming is being affected by the climate. I think one of the biggest changes, I mean, I could go on and on about the changes that we've seen in terms of weather. You know, when we started farming, our farm was at 1,800 feet in Hawley, which is not high for those of you from the Mountain West, but from around here, it's pretty high and pretty cold. And we would have, 3 weeks of 20 below in January, and it would reliably be winter. And then it would be spring and summer, and then it would be winter again. And most of what we've seen here in the Pioneer Valley and in the hill towns is that winter is not reliably winter anymore. Sometimes it's winter, sometimes it's not. And so that fluctuation from cold to warm has been affecting everything, mostly perennial crops like fruit trees, pastures, berries. Last year here in the valley, we had in early February, the temperature dropped to 17 below after not really even getting below freezing for most of the winter before that. So a lot of the fruit trees and berry crops hadn't really gone dormant, and then the temperature dropped to 17 below. And so most of the apple and peach crops were completely lost last year. And then in May, right before Memorial Day, the temperature dropped to 24 at our farm. And so there was a second round. All the strawberry and blueberry crops got lost. And then it proceeded to rain for the entire summer. Some of the farms here along the Connecticut River were completely flooded, some of them 3 different times, like lost everything, replanted, lost everything again. And so the big problem for sort of small A agriculture, local agriculture, is now there's nothing you can really depend on. Like, how do you plan for the fact that, you can plan if you say, okay, things are getting wetter, or you can plan if things are getting drier, but how do you plan for both? Because both of these things are happening. And we've found that there has been some really great community initiatives around helping farmers with this sort of thing. One of them, the state of Massachusetts, has actually been pretty helpful with that. They've founded the Natural Disaster Recovery Fund. I should be winding up soon. So, there's been some state funding, which has been fantastic. Farms are starting GoFundMes. But there's also, the margin with farming is always very small. And so ways in which farmers can learn to widen that margin always help, because it means you have a pool of money that you can work with to plan for things. And so I've done some volunteer work with an organization called CISA here in the Valley, Community Involved in Sustaining Agriculture. They have an emergency farm fund loan, which a donor established a fund where we can make no interest loans to farms that suffer emergencies, climate emergencies. And this year we've had, in the past 10 years, we've gone from having to have this loan opened up like every 3 years to now it's several times a year we open up this loan just because of climate stuff. And I'm getting the nudge. So I'm going to wrap that up. And I'm going to let Paul talk about, so I've been talking about the farming side of things. He's going to talk about some of the things on the yogurt making side that we're working on as well.
And I'm going to be quick. Well, mostly I want to hear what other people have to say. I want to hear your questions. But I think the biggest thing I'd like to add is one of the things we've learned is the importance of compromise, essentially not being a fundamentalist in trying to do better. So, what that means is we have been able to pay really close attention to soil health and bring really good quality food to people at a moderate price. Our target has always been to be about the same price as Stonyfield on the shelf. Because we are willing to give and take there. So therefore, we now bring 500,000 or 600,000 yogurt containers into the world every year. A little bit of karmic debt there, eh? And so there's a lot I could say about business in that way. But what I just want to leave you with before we move on is we have one very exciting project at the moment, which is a returnable, reusable stainless steel yogurt container. We got a grant for the pilot. We're working with River Valley Market, a large co-op in Northampton. They're going to be the pilot site. $5 deposit. And, you buy one, you pay your deposit, you bring it back, they scan it, you get, pay the deposit the second time, et cetera. We've got a nice silicone lid they'll go over for your fridge. And it's an off-the-shelf. It took us a long way around the horn, and then we ended up with an off-the-shelf item that is duplicable for other people. So I'm going to pass it around because, to me, the most compelling thing about this, spend a few seconds with it in your hand, and, just sort of try to imagine a world where there's not this constant plastic crap passing through your life, what that could feel like. And so there we go. I'll pass this around. I'll move on.
Oh my God, that's such a beautiful thought. Okay, so my name's Deb Pasternak. I am also class of '89, and one of the things that I want to note here is I don't think that we were all all best friends during college, and yet we're all living these lives that are very much associated with the largest issue of our time, which is climate change. And I think that that's it's a unifying community building problem. And I think that that's something that that I want people to walk away from this conversation with, is like, when you get involved around climate, you're actually building community, because that's the way that we solve it, through making connections. So my story, as you all know, I actually came to Amherst. You don't know this. I came to Amherst wanting to be a marine ecologist, and that was kind of landlocked. It wasn't really a good place for that. And so true story. True. So I ended up going to the Williams Mystic program, which is at Mystic Seaport. There's a program that Williams College has been running, and there I got to do the marine ecology I'd always wanted to do, and I also got to study the law of the sea and learn about policy. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Some of you might know my senior year, I was like, I'm going to be in fisheries management. Anyways, okay. So going on. So that's what I thought I was going to do. And then, as you all know, I became a singer-songwriter. But during college, I actually worked in photovoltaics. So the summer of 1987, I helped install solar panels at housing. And it was a time when all of the Reagan administration was actually taking away the incentives for solar panels at the time. And so it was a very sad time to be in the solar business, because people would just be talking about how they were closing when you were talking to suppliers. But I did that the summer of college, and then I went and became a singer-songwriter. And I always thought, like, I'm going to be like Bonnie Raitt and use my, fame to, like, get people to do the right thing about the environment. And I never got famous enough. And so when I was around early 30s, I decided to get back into renewable energy, and I ended up in the wind business. And did that for a while, worked for a utility-scale wind turbine manufacturer from Germany, like managed sales in North America, worked as a consultant building wind farms, became a stepmom for a few years. And when it came time for me to stop being a stepmom and go back into the workforce, which was around 2016, I decided to go into advocacy, because it was very clear that this was not about whether or not the technology is workable, whether or not these projects are bankable. It was all about political will. And so I got involved. I started volunteering, and that's another thing, folks. If you want to learn about climate and learn about climate solutions, volunteering is a great way to do it. It's like continuing education. You're never going to get all the answers. You're never going to know all the answers. You're going to spend your whole life learning more answers and helping to bring them to your own life and to your community. And so the Sierra Club was a great place for this to be done, because they have chapters everywhere across the country, and they have ways to plug in people that want to learn. So I had volunteers who wanted to learn about how much energy wind farm, offshore wind produces in the wintertime, and how that fits into the New England grid. Like, I had volunteers that wanted to learn about local agriculture and sustainable farming. I had volunteers that wanted to learn about reducing plastic. And we created systems for folks to learn about these things and then become advocates. And that's what the Sierra Club does. And so I headed the Massachusetts chapter for about 5 years after starting as a volunteer. And then I went to work nationally to help bring those learnings to all of the teams across the country, because we really built a great chapter here. If you're interested in learning about what your municipality is doing and can do on climate, we have a database that's online, that's free, that's available to everybody, that lists almost every municipality, 351 in the Commonwealth, what they're doing and who to contact to learn about those programs. So that's the kind of stuff that I went to national to learn. But similar to Amy's story, it really wasn't a sustainable lifestyle. I really was working way too much, because with the volunteers, you work at night, you work weekends, and really kind of ran myself down. And so I left my job actually about 2 months ago, and now am opening up a consulting biz with the contacts that I made through that. But that's another lesson. You can't get sustainability by running yourself into the ground. So we really need to create new and better models for the way that we bring this work into the world. So anyhow, so that's a little bit of my story, and I know that we want to hear your questions. So I'm going to move it on to this amazing 2019 graduate.
Awesome.
Before Emery starts, I wanted to say one thing. The label on here, the stickers, are betas. This is launching in August, hopefully. And so the QR code that I see people scanning is not live yet. Neglected to mention, it's not even the final iteration of the label. But Oh, that's good. We have a great graphic designer. Good. Sometimes it goes, graphic design world, they use like blah, blah, blah in Latin as their fill-in text. Just so awesome. But okay.
Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Emery Sorvino. I was the class of 2019. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. So I was an environmental studies major at Amherst, and I knew pretty early on, if not before school, that I wanted to study the environment. I was really attracted to growing food and gardening and just being in the green group in high school. And I knew that this was something that I wanted to continue when I was in college. So I took as many classes as I could, and I tried to make everything that I was doing a little bit more sustainable. I had a club called Green Athletics where we tried to get people to take shorter showers. Didn't work well, but we had to keep trying these things out. But so I took a lot of really great classes about the food system in college, the politics of food, a class that was all about corn, how corn was grown back in the day, and how now America is growing corn all over the place, and we probably don't need all of that corn. So that is where I am today. But when I graduated Amherst, it took me a while to get there. I wanted to save the world, and that's what I told everyone in the Career Center, and they said that you should do consulting. So that's what I did. And I did consulting for a few years, but it actually helped me gain a lot of really good business skills because I needed to figure out how the world worked if I wanted to change it. So now I'm very fortunate. I'm at a great startup called Indigo Agriculture, and we are trying to help make agriculture more sustainable. So I'm representing the regional and the national, I guess. So to put agriculture into context a little bit, we heard from Amy and Paul about what they're doing on the farm, but if we're thinking about this at a broader scale, globally, agriculture, forestry, and other land use is responsible for 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, which is huge. People think of energy, buildings, transportation, but our land is a really big part of this problem. So what we're doing at Indigo is trying to make this problem of agriculture a little bit better by helping farmers use, less fertilizer, build soil health, and just do things that we know are going to make an impact on emissions and actually help to remove some of the carbon dioxide that's being emitted from other sectors and store that in the soil. The way that agriculture works right now, and I'm not the expert here, but I think this is kind of the theory of the company that I work in, is that when you're putting fertilizer in the ground, when you're putting chemicals in the ground, you're degrading the soil and you're degrading the capacity of the land and the ability to hold carbon there. So what we want to do is help farmers build up carbon in their soils and build those sinks and really help them to do that more sustainably from a financial perspective. What Amy and Paul talked about is that farming is hard and that it can be, you can get a bad storm or you can get a late frost and your whole crop is ruined. So how are farmers supposed to take risks to do these things that we know are going to be really helpful for the planet? So what we're trying to do is connect farmers with buyers like corporations that have climate targets and say, we want you to incentivize those better practices, help farmers take on the risk, and that way we can get a little bit better. So, cool model, and I think that we need those better models in order to fix some of these problems that really exist. But what I hear a lot in the space that I'm working in is that, there's a lot of perfection and the pursuit of perfection. And right now, there are many that don't want to, many are afraid of greenwashing and are afraid of doing the wrong thing. What we're trying to do is have progress just be the road rather than actually pursuing perfection in and of itself. And that's really challenging at times. But I think that sustainability is just about making things a little bit better, a little bit at a time. And hopefully, we can all do that together.
Hi, I'm Abbey Gardner. I'm also class of 89. And my story, my career story has been kind of twisty, turny, circuitous to get to this panel here today. I was a Russian major in Amherst, sort of trying to think about the liberal arts question. And when I was a Russian major, I certainly didn't think that was going to lead to any kind of career. For me, it was really an academic pursuit, but I graduated in 89. which was a great time to graduate as a Russian major, and ended up working at the Soros Foundation for many years. And I was the regional director for Russia for many years. And while I was there, I began working. I met this brilliant young academic physician who some of you may have heard of. His name was Paul Farmer. And we worked together addressing tuberculosis in prisons across the former Soviet Union. And he was just a real inspiration to me. And when he was recruited by President Clinton to be his deputy at the United Nations. He was the deputy special envoy for Haiti in 2009. Paul brought me on board onto the team to be a policy advisor. And when we started that work at the UN, we were really looking at economic development in Haiti. But you will probably all recall that in January 2010, there was a devastating earthquake in Haiti, and our focus as a team completely shifted at that time, and we were very much just focused on the $13 billion that had been pledged by the world to address the response, the earthquake response. And initially, we saw our role as just holding donors accountable for their promises to make sure they paid up, and they paid out that $13 billion. And that was something President Clinton had done. He was also the envoy for the tsunami recovery, and he had done that to great effect. But when we really started doing the analysis and looking at the numbers, for the first time, we did a much different kind of analysis, and we started really looking at not how much of the $13 billion was spent, but where was it being spent, how was it being spent. And ultimately, our analysis showed that 90% of that money bypassed long-term institution building in Haiti. It bypassed the public sector. It bypassed investments in the country. It really mostly went to international NGOs and contractors. And I think you can kind of see the result of that today in Haiti. So we started questioning, well, was Haiti an outlier? Is it because Haiti is such a basket case? But when we really started applying this data analysis framework to every poor country in the world and the aid that it receives, and we did the same analysis for cholera in Haiti, the same analysis for Ebola in West Africa, and we're wrapping up a big global report on COVID-19 spending globally. We see the same trends, the same problems every time. So for this panel today, I took a look at the climate financing for the poorest countries, and you will not be surprised to learn that it's really the same story. So in 2009, the world came together and decided that the wealthy countries would mobilize $100 billion a year for the poor countries, because as we all know, the poor countries are bearing the brunt of climate change, and they're the least equipped to deal with it, have the least resources to deal with it. But the world missed the goal in 2020, missed the goal in 2021, missed the goal in 2022. And the good news is they actually met the goal this year. And it was announced to anybody that was following the big Copenhagen climate conference. Julie, I'm sure you were. They...
I'm a little jaded on those conferences.
Yes, so right, exactly. So they announced that that $100 billion was finally mobilized for the poor countries. The problem is when you start sort of applying this kind of real data analysis to see what money actually makes it to those countries that can be spent in those countries, can be spent on their national climate adaptation and mitigation plans, it is a tiny percentage of that $100 billion. So Oxfam does this shadow report every year, and in 2022, when it was approximately $85 billion, they found that only $24 billion of the $85 billion was available to the poor countries to spend. So you can extrapolate and assume that it's really the same with we'll see that next year in their next year's report. And the problem is that of the $100 billion, the vast majority is made up of loans. Some are concessional loans. Some are much, as Julie's going to tell you, some are much higher interest loans that the countries have to pay back, which adds tremendously. These are highly debt-burdened countries already. There also is, interestingly, there is no accepted definition of what climate financing even means. So donors can count all kinds of crazy things towards their climate financing. And the most egregious one that I saw, and it was reported on the CBC, and it was a report done by Reuters and Stanford that showed that Japan was able to count investing in a new coal plant in Bangladesh as climate financing funding. And there are other examples that are also just crazy. Ice cream stores and recording studios, all sorts of things. So the countries are getting a tiny percentage of this. The $100 billion also is a drop in the bucket of what they need. They actually need approximately probably closer to trillions of dollars, but they're not even getting the money that is promised to them and has been reported to them. So, this is something that my team, I now work for a think tank. This is really all we do is kind of dig down into the data of foreign aid and see where it actually ends up. And we're working on a report card right now because not only are none of the poorest countries in the world on track to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals for climate, but they're not on track to meet any of the Sustainable Development Goals right now. And the goal, the deadline is 2030. So we're 5.5 years out. So we really need to have better ways, more transparency, more understanding of where the money, we need more money, but more importantly, we need the money to be spent more transparently and more effectively.
All right, so let's step off the land. I was actually a math major at Amherst back when it wasn't like the biggest major on campus, which I'm not sure if you guys know that has changed. My junior year, I went on a study abroad program and in Israel, and I put my head underwater for the first time, and I saw the coral reefs, and I was like, what? We live on the same planet as this? And I was from St. Louis, so I had never seen anything like that. And I came back to Amherst, and I'm like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. And as Deb knows, that was really hard here. And it still is hard here. But nonetheless, I did do like a senior project on coral biomechanics in the flow tanks, and underneath the Pratt Gymnasium, there was an empty swimming pool with these flow tanks in there, and I measured the flow around these coral skeletons. And then, and then I applied to grad school, and I didn't get in, which was no surprise because I was a terrible candidate. I had taken no biology classes. But eventually I did get in, and I studied satellite imagery of the ocean. This was the 90s, and it was the first time that we were able to take a synoptic view of the ocean and try to see what was happening there. And we already knew in the 90s that we were burning so many fossil fuels that we were changing our atmosphere. The question was, what is the carbon cycle of our planet? How much carbon dioxide is going different places? And one of, the biggest reservoir on our planet is the ocean. And the whole surface of the ocean is full of these little plants called phytoplankton, and they photosynthesize. And photosynthesis is carbon dioxide plus sunlight plus water, sugar. And, so you're drawing down carbon dioxide. But we didn't know how much when I started my dissertation. And so I worked on those algorithms, and it turns out 30% of the carbon dioxide we have released through burning fossil fuels, is taken up by the ocean. So climate change would be 30% worse at this point. I mean, you could think about like our trajectory would be in a much worse spot. And the ocean, along with taking up carbon dioxide, takes up heat separately. And the ocean has taken up 90% of the heat held in our atmosphere by the warming planet. And so the oceans are warming faster than the land is, actually. And that is causing major changes already in our ocean systems. After I finished my PhD, I fell off the academic path and moved to Central Texas. And I started writing textbooks. And that was great because one of the things that happened at Amherst was I became very intimidated about all the great writers we had in our class, like so many. And one of the great things that happened as I started writing was that one of my friends in this room told me, go for it anyway. Just try to be a writer. Be the worst writer you can, but do it. And so I think one of the things that Amherst gave me was like friends who told me to try something new. Actually, another thing happened after college when I wanted to be a marine biologist, but I couldn't. Another friend in this room told me, like, you need to be a marine biologist. So, yes, there was a lot of learning in the classroom here, but I think the people who we surrounded with have shown up again and again in our lives to give us courage, and I'm so grateful for that. Anyway, I eventually started writing a bunch of articles, and they did well, and I got this idea to write a book about jellyfish. And really, I wanted to write a book about climate change, but I didn't think anyone wanted to hear another being preached at about climate change. But they might want to hear about jellyfish because they're weird and bizarre and no one knows anything about them. And I really didn't either. And so I wrote this book called Spineless: The Science of Jellyfish and the Art of Growing a Backbone. And it was it was not just science, but it was kind of this memoir about like basically a bad boyfriend I had in grad school, but also me growing my background to have a voice in this world, to share what I thought about what we're doing to our planet. And that book did well, and then I was asked, my publisher said I could write another book, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go back to the coral. But as we know, the coral are doing really poorly because of what I mentioned about the ocean taking up so much heat. And the coral reefs are the most diverse ecosystem in our ocean and maybe anywhere. 860,000 species depend on the coral reefs. So it's like almost impossible to conceive of what that means. Because like when we think about like the Endangered Species Act, we were protecting one species at a time. When we think about the coral reefs, then it's 860,000 species that are supported by this ecosystem. It's like unintelligible. And yet half the coral reefs on our planet have already died because of climate change. And it's a really tough thing to swallow. They are incredibly foundational to life on our planet, and yet they're so invisible because we are terrestrial. We live up here on land. We tend to ignore what's happening in our oceans, even though it supports us. 1 billion people depend on the coral reefs for their primary source of protein. They are the best protection we have against storms. 97% of storm energy is deflected by coral reefs. And then all those species that are just, hoping that their lives can continue. So I was really worried about writing a book with all these sad stories behind it. But what I discovered was that it's not over yet. Like, we have lost half our coral reefs, but half of them are left. And there are people out there who are trying to do a lot of wonderful things to protect the coral reefs. And so the second book is called Life on the Rocks, because coral are life that actually build their own rocks. And I go around the world and I follow the stories of the people who are doing things to restore coral reefs, protect them, find out if their genetics may evolve fast enough to sustain them. And I've gone on too long, but I'll say the last thing that I want to say, which is that after that book was published, this guy from Honduras reached out to me, and he was like, you have to come see my coral reef. And I was like, but you are in Honduras, right? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, but the Caribbean is really sick. It's like the worst. The coral are getting hit the hardest there of anywhere in the world. And he's like, come see. So I went down there. And in this place where the Banana Republic literally started, where you can see the banana docks from the banana boats that took bananas up to the United States starting in 1910, the coral reefs are 10 times more healthier than anywhere else in the Caribbean. the diseases that have swept across the Caribbean don't exist in this bay. And no one has studied it. This bay was at risk from a mining operation. And so the people in this town fought off this mining operation that was going to come in from China. But in the process, they learned that if people don't know about it, it's not going to be safe. So they decided to build the only public aquarium in Central America in this town. And the loan that they had to take out was at 51% for a construction loan. And the aquarium is free to the public. All you have to do is listen to an 8-minute video on why coral reefs are so important before you go in. Already, it is one of the biggest tourist attractions in Honduras. And so I don't know how to sum this up, but like this story does go from like the global and down to the local, but these things are all interconnected. And these stories are all unfolding, they're ongoing. And so I think I'll maybe leave it there, but we'd love to have your questions. And Sarah is going to bring around a microphone to anyone who needs it. Okay.
And I'm gonna tell a story that you told me in 1993, and then I'm gonna tell it orally, obviously, and then you're gonna tell me how it sounds now, and then maybe you all will respond to this. So you and I were sitting on a bluff overlooking the Pacific in '93, and we were worried already about what was happening, right? And you said, well, there's this Gaia theory. The globe, and as I remember, you said that the Gaia theory is that the Earth is one large organic system. It's like a being. And the good news is the being will take it, it can maintain its own health. It will self-regulate ultimately. The bad news is that if we're the fleas or the bacteria that's finally irritated enough, it will shake us off in order to maintain its health. I've thought of that many times since. So how's your Gaia theory sit with you now?
It's so interesting you bring that up. I think I was struggling in that moment. So that was 93.
Yeah, maybe.
I was, or 4, something like that. So I was getting my PhD. I had been working on climate change for like the satellite imagery work on climate change. I went to Rome for the summer because my PhD advisor was working at the United Nations at FAO, this Food and Agricultural Organization in Rome. And I went to work with him in Rome. And I came back to the United States and suddenly climate change was in question. And I was like, wait, what? Like whiplash, because it had been an actual thing prior to like 1994. And that's when a lot of these disinformation campaigns started, but I didn't know that at the time. But I think I was probably trying to like figure out in my own mind, like, what is going on here? I do still believe in the Gaia hypothesis. I think it's true. I think our planet is a massive, you can look at it as a massive organism with systems like we have. And I think that we are beholden to our planet in a way that we don't maybe think about enough. I'm really against spending all that money on going to Mars, which is a cold, dark, void of a place. And I feel like we should be looking more at our own planet and what we can do here. And so will it shake us off as humans? Like, possibly. That's a real possibility. The planet will still exist no matter what we do. But yeah, I do still feel like the Gaia hypothesis has true value. Anyone else want to?
Can I add one quick thing? Yeah. I recently read James Lovelock's original book on the Gaia theory, which is fantastic. And what struck me about it, he started from the point of science, started from the point of view of looking at regulation of atmospheric gases and how the only explanation for the atmospheric gases that we have on Earth is some sort of a self-regulating organism, because it couldn't have happened by random chance. And he then backtracked from there to where he never said it, but to something that implied sentience for the organism as a whole, which to me has tremendous power, right? As far as we are to the planet as a cell in our finger is to our body. And if you allow yourself to think about that for a little bit, it implies an awful lot of responsibility, implies an awful lot of connection as well, though. And what I love about it, though, is he didn't get there from some spiritual direction. He got there starting from science and ended up at that. He didn't say it, though, in the book, but he certainly implies it, don't you think?
Yeah.
And so, anyway.
Yeah, and one of the things at Sierra Club, one of their slogans is like "Save the Planet," and it's not save the planet; it's save the biosphere, right? The biosphere is what we need, and that's what Gaia doesn't need, right? There's other ways to have life on the planet besides our forms, as we know with the deep sea vents. So, yeah, so that's like it's in my mind it's a little bit dark, but yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Anyone else respond? No? Okay. Mar?
I think that's really interesting. I was talking with Umi and another person in our class this morning about how Americans in particular are so bad at end-of-life conversations. And it's so interesting to have that in my mind listening to this, whether or not you think of the planet as being looking at end of life or our biosphere in that way. But what is it about those conversations, and as just one person sitting here thinking, I want to buy that yogurt, but also like, where are the billions going? Yeah. Like, how can we have the end of life conversation in a productive way, or what can you best do to spend the time you have to not make it worse? Anyone?
I saw Emery. Emery had an answer. Let's ask the youngest.
This is going to be a weird answer, but I think that when we think about, I think that the answer is that we need to have broader imaginations. We need to think about really what we are trying to preserve and what we are trying to live for, and how we think about what a happy, successful life looks like and what we really want to leave for future generations. What I think is really interesting about the word sustainability is that it's all about sustaining what we have now, but what we have now has been causing a lot of problems. So we need to force ourselves to have broader imagination about what really we should be trying to preserve or conserve or sustain, whatever you might think the word should be. But I think that that's just kind of one solution, is just to be bold and really push yourself to think broadly.
Yeah, and one of the things that I want, after hearing Abby talk about where does the money go internationally, the same can be said, where does the money go here in the United States? Like this is why I believe so much in local people getting involved locally and creating change locally. And there's good federal dollars for that right now in the IRA.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Inflation Reduction Act. Yeah, but just we're not going to solve climate change by giving tax incentives to people to like put on solar panels on their house. There were tax incentives to get an electric vehicle. There's people that can't afford that. We need to actually be paying for everybody to transition off of fossil fuels. That's a very different mindset than what what people are willing to have right now. But that's why it's something that, again, starting in your communities, you start modeling solutions that then can be adopted statewide and then nationally. And I think that that's, a good way to start with what you can do personally.
I also want to add just one more thing. One of the things that this organization that I referenced earlier, CISA, has done is that they have made business planning sort of mandatory. They're not requiring, but it has made it much more accepted for farmers here in the Valley to be business people, to run their farms as an actual business. And they provide the training for that. There are all kinds of classes in, everything from like running enterprise budgets to doing your own books to doing your own taxes. And that, I think, sort of plays off what Emery is talking about looking at things in a totally different, creative way. Like, what can you do? And what I have seen is that these business planning courses have meant that the Pioneer Valley farmers here are some of the smartest farmers around, but it also means that they have more money to deal with whatever is being thrown at them. And so they have a broader margin, which means they have more flexibility to adapt to changes that are coming this way. And so that's not really something that we talk about a lot with sustainability. We tend to talk about more sort of soft topics. But I think business actually has a lot of power to drive change in around sustainability and climate change. And even just like a small thing like that, like teaching farmers to really run their businesses as businesses has made a huge difference here in the Valley.
One more last quick little attempt at, I don't actually have an answer to Margie's question, needless to say. I do have a thought experiment, though, that is related. You know, there are a lot of different traditions, a lot of different points of view about what happens when we as individuals die, we as individual cells in the finger of the larger organism. Let's just imagine the people who, the traditions that talk about reincarnation, have it right. So that a lot of us in this room, it's like, I'm going to kind of be checking out about the time it gets really bad. Well, what about if you're checking back in about the time it gets really bad? I'm telling you, sit with it for a while as you go about your life. It is a useful thought experiment.
Zach, go ahead.
Yeah, so, you know, Abby's comment about, Emily, welcome to class of 89. Abby's comment about misappropriations, you know, global in the developing world. Well, look at it in our country, right? I've seen a study recently that 84% of the monies that are being made available to Bill and the IRA are going to indirectly or directly to fossil players in order to basically, you know, in the end, have them transition to a more, but, okay, so that's a real problem, right? What is the single, thank you for your expertise, and I'm not, maybe someone who wants to take this on, what is the easiest way for humans to change the chemistry of the atmosphere? To reduce the parts per billion of CO2 in the atmosphere?
Turn off your lights. Sorry.
No. I mean, I think this is a really, well, I wonder if we might need to do something that doesn't have to do with carbon dioxide, which is to shade our planet. And yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about solar shading ideas, because I don't know if the coral have time for us to pull the carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere. And there's a group of Australians who are working on a project. This is geoengineering, but they're doing it on a regional level, so it doesn't really count as climate change, but a climate change mitigation tool. But it's called marine cloud brightening, and basically the idea is you take seawater and you spray it into the low-lying clouds. The clouds become brighter and reflect more radiation away from the planet, and you can get about a 2 degrees Celsius decrease in temperature below those clouds, and that may be enough to protect the Great Barrier Reef coral. But if you did this, scientists have told me that if you did this on a global scale, we could control the temperature of our planet until we got our act together to deal with our fossil fuels. And I think I feel like there's enough urgency around this issue that we should be doing everything now and not waiting. One of the other really important things, we give fossil fuel industries something like, I don't know, the numbers all over the place, but, you know, between $400 billion and $2 trillion in subsidies a year. We give them subsidies, and we need to stop that. And then, I mean, I know because we've had a conversation, but I think that carbon sequestration, especially from point sources where we're emitting a lot of carbon dioxide, is low-hanging fruit for us to start collecting that carbon dioxide and putting it back in the reservoirs where we extracted it in the first place. Some of these things I've just said are quite controversial, and so we can talk about them later, but I don't think anything should be off the table at this point. Yeah, you know what, I'm going to go to the back because a couple of those guys have been raising their hands for a while. Yeah, go ahead.
So hearing about like how countries are not getting the funding, or not receiving the money that they're needing, or the money that they're promised, and hearing about things like how people can't afford to like get those tax incentives for like solar and electric. I'm hearing about those things. I'm wondering, like, do you have any other comments about like the intersection between sustainability and social racial justice?
Who wants to take that?
I'm happy to take that. Yeah, that's, like I said, there's no way that we actually deal with climate change without dealing with inequity, because, here's a great example. People are like, oh, well, we can't put solar panels on poor people's houses because their roofs aren't constructed well enough to hold them. Right? And so, we have to create a program where we give people houses that are safe and healthy for them to live in and put solar panels on those. And so that's what the IRA does a lot of this. Like 40% of IRA funding is to go to low income and frontline communities, impacted communities, with programs exactly that do home and safety repairs at the time of adding electrification for buildings. And so what happens is, people who live in substandard housing actually get good housing that actually is climate friendly. So those are the kind of programs that absolutely can't be off the table either. It just costs money, and I feel so stupid even saying those words, because you know what costs money? Climate change, right? Like losing all of our coral reefs, that costs money. So you know what I'm saying? So it's just the idea that, it costs too much money to electrify stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. It actually doesn't cost too much. It's what we need to do. And for some reason that's become very radical in our political discourse, and that's what we need. As people with the privilege of Amherst College behind us, we need to use our networks to help change that narrative.
Shags?
Can I add two quick things? Yeah. I think the Economist's estimate is about 3% of global GDP to do everything it needs to be done, right? That seems pretty reasonable to continue to have a planet. What I think about this question, though, is we could just throw ethics out the window and accept that all of the studies of happiness say that a Western middle-class standard of living is sort of the sweet spot, right? It doesn't go up much from there. And so people in the developing world and poorer people in the developed world are just not going to stop wanting what we consider to be a middle-class standard of living. It's just not going to happen. And so we're finished if that can't happen in an equitable way. It's just the basic facts of the matter. So,
okay. Shags, you want to finish us off? This last question.
I've never thought of it, and I appreciate how you said that. As we all sit here as a group, and my thought, we're worried about we're having a discussion with older people, and by the way, now I'm sitting here with the younger people. Well, your group is invested in this issue at a time where Amherst wasn't suited to think about this. And Wes and the people, my son Bobby said, the number of environmental studies students have doubled since you guys were here, right? You were like one of 20, now it's like 40 or 60, Wes here?
It's 30 to 60.
30 to 60, right? It's a way better place because all of you guys did the groundwork and now you're building on it. And we're here to hear how we build on it. And thank God a bunch of you did this. And thank God a bunch of you young guys are doing it, because it's going to extend the end of life. Right? It's going to extend us trying to give to our children a longer life. The one I'll say is that at the speech that the president was doing, they saluted the class of 49. 2 guys here, class of 49. You do the math real quick and go, whoa. And what Betsy said is, we all want to be that. We all want to just be here when we're 102 years old, right? And with all the work you're doing, it started us on that path, and hopefully Amherst is here to make it better. And thank you for being the young one in the room. You guys couldn't have done what you're doing now. It wasn't here. So it's tough to hear you say, but it's better and more ready to be helped, I think. And that's what I got from this.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think we've hit time. That was a great note to end on. Thank you. Thank you to this amazing panel. We've made a fence.